Hello, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back to another CSGO video here on the channel. Definitely a weird video that I've wanted to do for quite some time, and of course, especially thanks to recent news out there, something I really want to bring up, and that of course is a story of Swag we have seen ever since his time at iBuyPower. So I'm going to give you guys a bit of a story time and kind of recap the struggles this man has gone through along with side of him. Of course, other players being a part of that iBuyPower roster have also equally struggled, but I think his path has been harder than most. Of course, we look back to that January day, January 26th of 2015, where the entire roster besides the likes of Skadoodle was actually banned for match fixing by Valve and given a lifetime ban from the game. Ever since then, we had people like ESL come out and say they've unbanned the match fixers. DreamHack as well, after a 5-year sentence, these guys will be able to compete at DreamHack events. With the likes of ESL, that does mean IEM is also open for these guys. The one thing that's been on the tip of their minds most likely is the major, which they can never attend, and Valve will likely never bend on those rules. And along with that, it does seem as well some other organizers refuse to actually let these guys in, ECS being one of them, and that has made them the target of many roster changes out there, especially as of late for our man Swag. Now we look at this roster, of course, Skadoodle retires back in 2018, and then hopefully will return one day to CSGO, but with his retirement, it does mean of that former iBuyPower roster, just 2 players remain in competitive CSGO. You know, Dazed has fallen off, AZK also leaving the scene. That does leave both Swag and Steel to remain as a part of this iBuyPower former roster, actually playing competitive CSGO and still has a chance to compete for further prize pools and possibly in the way future a CSGO major if it might ever happen. Say Steel is not lucky. He has certainly worked to where he is. He has found a team that actually can perform without the major. Yes, they use James IRL, their coach, to participate in the major qualifiers, have fallen short, I believe, in both their appearances. There might have been a third one, but I believe just 2 tries their last 2 majors with James as a stand-in for Steel, and have both fallen short. But luckily enough for Steel, he has found a team who can compete and earn enough with other prize pools out there besides the major and besides ECS events. And when they do not need him, they find a stand-in, and well, they kind of do need him. But besides that, a man who's lucky enough to find a team like that and grow with them, other side of things, Swag has been not so lucky. You look back to, of course, just after that ban in 2015, he joins Cloud9 as a part-time streamer, or whatever you want to classify him as, until the formation of Team GX. You know, AZK and Steel and Swag, they join back up with Team GX, eventually become the torched roster we once knew, and climbed throughout the premier season. Had a few solid seasons with that team, one in particular before ESL Pro League Season 8. We saw these guys really rise together, and it was almost a click, a reformation of that once iBuyPower roster. They fell short, though, in that season, just shy, in fact, did not actually qualify for ESL Pro League Season 8. Along with them, it was actually Freakazoid and Cooper. At the same time, they were trying to qualify with their newly formed Swole Patrol. They had several shots themselves, and both teams fell just short when it came to the final LAN to qualify for Pro League. Obviously, the ultimate goal for many pro players out there, and well, the tremendous changes continued to haunt a guy like Swag. And then just 2 weeks after failing to make Pro League that time around, it was the disbandment of that torqued roster, and it seemed all a sly bit connected. It was actually Swag first announcing his departure. A day later, his friend AZK also left the roster, and ironically enough, it did seem a bit almost scripted, because the trio, just a day after, the remaining trio, including Steel, then joined the now Ghost Gaming roster. A few changes, of course, going their ways, and it seemed another tumultuous change for Swag, and a roster again that almost left him behind. But luckily enough, the ex-Torqued roster did continue, AZK announcing his pretty much official retirement from the esport itself, but Swag did continue. Alongside him, though, as well, we had Marky, we had Exotic, a few other names out there you may or may not recognize, which he did play with again in the future. They joined the ex-Torqued roster and continued only for about 2 months, and once again, that roster also fell apart. But this was actually a lucky point in time when we finally saw the Swole Patrol roster that eventually rose to achieve what we never thought they really could, and that, of course, was Cooper and Freakazoid. Them actually trying with the former Swole Patrol roster, had some pretty solid runs, with the likes of Swag also joining them. Also, at the time, it was Ryan and Silent to join that roster and complete it. They had a pretty extenuous run together, although a slew of roster changes did happen. Cooper, Freakazoid, and Swag were the core of that roster to eventually succeed, and almost right away, guys, they won Fragadelphia. Fragadelphia 12 was the event, and just a few days prior to that, it was actually Swag coming out with a pretty crazy story. There've been a lot of hate out there, a lot of hassle in the community, especially on the Reddit forums, talking about Swag and his slurred speech and his slow speech, and he actually came out and had a story about, yes, when he was a kid, at just the age of 9 years old, he was shot in the head, and one of the many side effects he did suffer from that was a bit of a speech impediment. And again, just 3 days later, they went on to win Fragadelphia 12. This roster grinded together, and over the course of 4.5 to 5 months, yes, a lot of roster changes did come, but they did the unthinkable. They rose together, even without Cooper leaving the roster, which we talked about here many months ago. He kind of left them in the dust dust for that Pro League season, as they pretty much had to qualify on their own, and they did it. They did it in such prestigious fashion, guys. They've topped off the North American Premier season at a great record as well. A very, very solid looking team, and you think this might be the final rise for a player like Swag, right? So many rosters ahead of time, 3 or 4 rosters down the road, many roster changes as well. He finally survives this one with a pretty solid looking roster, a team who definitely can try and compete for a top half of Pro League, definitely try and qualify for the leagues out there. Until, yes, we heard the news. It was Cooper a few months prior to their qualifying for Pro League. He left the roster altogether, and then shortly afterwards, Freakazoid lives up to his word in his notorious rant we actually covered here as well. He did say if Cooper would leave, he would try and qualify that Swole Patrol roster for Pro League, and he would depart himself. He left for Ghost Gaming, and Zelsis then, just a few weeks later, actually sometime shortly afterwards, he confirms his joining of Cloud9 as a stand-in player and stays there pretty much permanently, and it leaves the Swole Patrol roster in a bit of a question mark as to what to do. Now, they actually filled that roster as well. Vanity and Food actually replacing him and Zelsis alongside them from Team Singularity, and the roster is once again, for at least a small amount of time, partially whole. We also have stand-in player Sam actually helped this team qualify for IEM Sydney, their first ever major LAN qualifier besides Epicenter back in the day when Freakazoid was back on the roster, and then lightning hits once again. It was pretty crazy to see as of 2 days ago, guys. It's Marky, Vanity, and Food. The majority of the roster that also qualified for the IEM Sydney spot once again leaves Swag in the dust. And with that being said, it's now remains just Swag on the Swole Patrol roster, though only man in CSGO history to try and retain a Pro League spot with one man on the roster that actually qualified for it. Freakazoid's gone. He's on Ghost. They have a Pro League spot. Zelsis to Cloud9. They have a Pro League spot. Half his roster, Marky, Vanity, and Food, now to eUnited. They already have a Pro League spot. We would think he would get to keep it, although we don't know. Pro League's still a bit away, and he is now a one-man standing army. Although Sam could certainly join the roster, he didn't help qualify the roster. We'll wait for ESL to announce exactly what will happen, because remember, the team they did play to actually compete for that spot, if they're still together, that being the Can't Win LAN team, who also plays second to these guys, they could technically, by rule set, actually get the spot instead, which would leave Swag, a man who, after such a tumultuous trial over these past 3.5 years, right, ever since he was 18 years old and made one decision for a few $100s in skins that he probably never knew would bite him back in the butt 3.5 years later, and has certainly bitten the butts of all of his former teammates besides just one, that being Steel. He goes from them to Cloud9, to GX, to Torqued, to X-Torque, to Swole Patrol, being kicked off Swole Patrol pretty much, but then sticking on it, and instead Swole Patrol leaves him, and he does the unthinkable. He qualifies for the notorious Pro League, which many pro players have seen come with sponsorships, and this roster has time and time again struggled to achieve those, and it seems by the likes of just having one name on the roster, and that being Swag. I feel immensely bad for the guy. His story certainly does not end here, though, and it's pretty crazy to see who's now qualified for Pro League may risk losing that alongside his IEM Sydney spot, which he also helped qualify for, because the team could not stick it out with this man because they're afraid they can't play majors with him. As always, I hope you guys all enjoy. My name is Jake. I'll be back here hopefully tomorrow with more CSGO news for all of you, and until then, I'll see you guys next time.